Blog Talk Radio.
And good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of NBA Unplugged. I'm your host, Jacob Noble from the ProBasketballTalk.com. Alongside of me, as always, is Brian Gelso from HoopsCritic.com. How are we doing today, Brian?
Good, Jacob. How are you?
Good, good. A little under the weather, but, we'll manage through it as we always do.
Yeah, you don't sound wonderful today, bud.
I know. Not much sleep last night. Late nights for this young guy. But
burn the candle at both ends, you get burnt in the middle there, little brother.
Oh, exactly. One day, he'll catch up to me, but for now, we'll keep doing it. But, we got a good show today. We took a couple weeks off, kind of slow off-season news, but today we have a very special show, and it's something that you and I have touched on for quite some time now, is the Dwight Howard story. And we're going to have a very interesting perspective from our good friend Jarrod Rudolph from RealGM, which I got to admit something here. That was the first website I ever used for sports information outside of, the worldwide leader. But, I think you and I are going to have a fun show with Jarrod and just get his take on everything. Get what their side is saying. And because most of the time it's just, fans' reaction to, who says what and who reports what, and I think everyone gets overblown. So it's going to be a fun time to talk with Jarrod and pick his brains.
Well, Dwight's become a little bit of a punchline in all this stuff. And, Jarrod has broken a lot of key Dwight stories through all this, has a relationship with Dwight. And I think there's been a lot of misconceptions from Dwight's end about the nature of all this stuff and some things that have gone on. And kind of, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to Jarrod, I heard him do an interview on ESPN Radio 2 weeks ago with Stephen A. Smith. And there's some interesting stuff that's gone on behind the scenes with Dwight and Orlando management that has kind of led to where this has come to. And a lot of the things aren't talked about a lot. Dwight's not necessarily waging that type of PR war against the Magic while he needs them to trade him. So, it'll be interesting to hear how Jarrod addresses some of these things, because I'm going to ask him a couple of these questions because I'm really, really curious as to what shakes out here and with Dwight and where he comes from and all this, and how his back is doing, and some stuff about what's finally going to happen here when and where Dwight gets back out on the basketball court, which is really where this story should be.
No, you're absolutely right, and we're not going to keep our guest holding any longer. So without further ado, we have Jarrod Rudolph from RealGM. You can follow him on Twitter. It's JRudolphSports. And how are we doing today, Jarrod?
It's Jarrod, and I'm doing well, man. I appreciate
Jarrod?
you guys for having me. Yes, sir.
All right.
Jarrod, thanks so much for joining us today, bub.
Anytime, man.
So, you have a very good perspective on all of this. You got sources that most people don't have. So, you kind of hear straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And, we kind of just want to dissect what happened here, because from 2009, where, they reached the NBA Finals, a lot of people felt they overachieved, that famous moment with Dwight and Jameer Nelson sitting on the bench watching the Lakers. From that moment on, I think Orlando fans, and even Dwight probably felt this way, that, it was the beginning of something. And as it turns out, it's actually sort of led to the end of this relationship between Orlando Magic and Dwight Howard. Talk to us a little bit about, the early stages of this departure between the two. What to you was the starting point that led to this road that we're eventually on right now?
Well, the winning covered up a lot of things that were going on in 2009. I think that was the start of Dwight kind of branching off from Stan and questioning some of the ways that Stan had been using him. If you can remember in the series against the Celtics, after the game, Dwight called Stan out for not using his dominant player. He later took it back, but, they beat the Celtics in 7, and then they go on to the NBA Finals. And then when you're winning, it's easy to forget about that stuff. But that team never had an opportunity to get back. In the offseason, Otis breaks him up. Turkoglu's gone. Vince Carter's in. Courtney Lee is gone. Rafer Alston is gone. And you still had a lot of ill feelings, guys like Rafer Alston and Anthony Johnson, who were big in getting the Magic to the NBA Finals, had their roles changed to bring back Jameer Nelson, who had missed about 4 months with the shoulder injury. So you had these things lingering, but all the while, a team that never had an opportunity to get back slowly started to digress. Next year you go to the conference finals, you lose, Vince Carter doesn't show up, and after that you lose in the first round of the playoffs. And then, when you are losing games, those issues that you're having, it becomes more difficult to deal with.
Now, Jarrod, in a lot of this, and as time's gone on, and please correct me if I'm wrong about anything, because one of the things that makes this very fascinating for Jacob and I today with you is that so much of what you hear out there is what everybody's saying about Dwight and what's being floated out of the Magic organization. Dwight's got a side of the story here, and in terms of hearing, even inklings of his side of the story, I heard an interview you did with Stephen A. Smith about a week and a half ago on ESPN Radio in New York, and there were some interesting things in there. It's, Dwight's been made out to be a little bit of a fool in the media, and that's not really all that fair for a lot of things that have come out. So anything I ask you, if you don't want to answer it, you can kind of to move around that. But you start to talk about some of these issues with Stan and how he's used. Now, he wasn't necessarily used offensively in the way that he wanted to. Were there further issues personality-wise with Stan that started all this? I can remember a series in 2009 when they went to the finals where they got challenged in the first round a little bit by the Sixers. And Dwight pretty much in front of a press corps, after a game, turned around and said, hey, listen, you know what? You can't yell at grown men the way this man yells at us. And yeah, he wasn't wrong, but it appeared at that point, before they went to the finals, that he was starting to lose them a little bit. How much of a role did that type of stuff, Stan's style and the personality differences, play in the relationship unwinding?
Well, the personality definitely played in to things. I don't think Stan was losing his team. I think he was losing Dwight. Dwight's opinion of Stan and other players' opinion of Stan aren't necessarily the same. Now, I do think that the negativity that was perceived from the yelling, that was something that guys wanted Stan to change, but Dwight just took it, a little bit further. And let me say this about Stan Van Gundy. He was given a raw deal. I think that a lot of the frustration that he and Dwight went through was because they had no one else but themselves to look at. Dwight never has played with a second star. Rashard Lewis and Jameer Nelson, they've made all-star teams, but they're not second stars. So the real second star on that team was Stan, or Dwight was the second star, but it was really those two. And when things start to go wrong, they only have each other to look at. Dwight wants to be the prototypical center. He wants this team to go to him early, go to him late. Not necessarily for a shot, but he wants to at least get the touches. But Stan doesn't have that luxury to go down to Dwight because when teams start doubling down, of course, Stan doesn't have anyone else on the team that can create. So to keep everyone involved, Dwight's using a lot of pick and rolls because they don't have anyone that can create their own shot. That's Otis Smith's fault. And I think that Stan took the bulk of it because he's coaching the system based around the players and the talents that he has. And I think he wasn't given enough credit for the coaching job that he did with Orlando because this was probably a team that performed a lot better than what their talent should have allowed. And, I think that in terms of Dwight's development, look, he's a 6-time All-Star, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year with Stan. It's really hard to argue those results. But to answer the question, I don't think Stan lost the team, but Dwight definitely, and the team didn't like the negativity, how Stan, they felt like it was always end of the world scenario, and that, he took things so personally, almost like a loss that, it just exuded a negativity amongst the team. Now, one man's negativity is another man's passion. So, it's hard to interpret whether, Stan was truly negative. I know that he did acknowledge that he was going to try to change the way he approached things, but it was just something that just kept coming up, just the approach that Stan would take with the players and just how it wasn't something that resonated with Dwight.
It's almost as if, Stan Van Gundy's style has increased pressure to the way the players, take a look at certain games and certain scenarios. As you kind of said, you made everything seem like it was the end of the world, and sometimes you kind of need a relaxed coach, like a guy like Phil, just laugh and smile on the bench. But I want to jump into the relationship between Otis Smith and Dwight Howard because we all know that most star players have a say here or there, who can come to town with them or, general managers usually keep open communications with their star players on what their plans are, who they're targeting. How much of that played in effect down in Orlando? How much say did Dwight have on, the acquisitions? And you mentioned that he wasn't happy with, 2009's, off-season results with letting Ito walk for a big contract and bringing in guys like Vince Carter. Talk to us a little bit about the relationship between Otis Smith and Dwight and how much of a say Dwight had in the transactions.
Well, it depends on who you ask. Dwight will say that he didn't have much, and the things that he's asked for, the organization hasn't done. Otis would say that he did consult Dwight on personnel decisions, but he's not going to always do what Dwight wants. And, Dwight would tell you that he did not know anything about the trades that brought Gilbert Arenas and Jason Richardson to Orlando. Otis will tell you that Dwight did know about the trades that brought those two guys in and, was happy with them until Stan kind of, the consensus is Stan micromanaged Gilbert, potentially out of the league. If you remember when Gil first came before practices, he was playing well. He was playing well in Washington before, about 17.6 assists a game. But, the Magic were rolling there, won like 7 or 8 in a row. But then they get to practice, and things change, and, Gil, he starts to shrink and continues to shrink throughout the year. And that was, kind of an issue that, guys didn't feel like Stan let them, play with any fluidity out there. But in terms of personnel decisions, I respect Otis, his approach. Now, you want to consult your star player. You want to keep him involved, but you can't acquiesce to everything that your star player wants. If you want Anthony Morrow over J.J. Redick, at some point somebody's got to be the grown-up and tell you that J.J.'s better than Anthony Morrow, and we're going to keep J.J. I see Glenn Davis was someone that was on this list that is said that Dwight had, and that didn't work out too well. So, Otis had to do what he needed to do, manage the team, and put out a lot of the fires before they happened. But as far as I know, all in all, they had a good relationship. I don't think it was bad. Towards the end, it wasn't great because there were personal feelings. But from what I understand, it ended on a good note.
Now, in that Stephen A. Smith interview, Jarrod, you talked about a couple things that occurred, some conversations Dwight had with management around the time of the 2011 draft, pre-lockout. there were some issues that had went on between Dwight and the team. Dwight expecting them to go out and get them the help that he had desired, that he felt he needed to stay in Orlando to have somewhat of a productive winning team there. According to what you know from Dwight, what kind of promises exactly were broken around that period of time?
Well, that's a long story, and let me apologize ahead of time for being long-winded, but I try to give you.
We're always long-winded here, my man. Don't even apologize, just go.
Okay, so right after they had lost to the Hawks, right after the season ended, of course, there was all types of talk on what was going to happen with Stan. Notice who was going to get fired because, everyone knew that this was going to be the last year of Dwight's contract, or he could opt out. So there was already panic setting in as to whether Dwight was going to stay or not. Now, he never let on at that point that he was leaning towards staying or going, but as soon as it was over, people started asking him questions, local media and everything like that. So it was frustrating to him. As told to me, a couple of days after they lost to the Hawks, Dwight had a meeting with Otis Smith, and they talked about the team as a whole. They discussed Stan, they discussed personnel moves, they discussed Dwight's future, and he was told that Dwight expressed that he felt like the team needed to upgrade in some areas. Maybe Stan, his voice was fading. Didn't suggest that he was fired, as told to me, but maybe that he may have been losing his voice. And Otis agreed to a certain extent on some things, not all things. But at some point, the relationship took a left. I think Otis tried to get Dwight to sign an extension at that point, and the presentation of the extension wasn't something that Dwight took. He took it the wrong way, I guess Otis would say. Dwight felt like he was being brought there to discuss, the season and everything like that. He felt like he was bombarded a little bit with the contract talks. Still, Otis relayed his message to the front office, and they fly Dwight to the Voss residence in Michigan. Now, on the plane ride there, it's all decked out for Dwight. They got cookies, the special Dwight Howard cookies. I believe they were macadamia nut. All the trimmings, everything that you want on a private plane. They fly him out to Michigan. He has a meeting with the DeVos family, and they expressed to him at that point that they were willing to do anything Dwight needed and wanted to make the team, a championship contender, get the players that they wanted. Let us know what you need. Let us know what you want. I believe Bob Vanderwaal was there at the time. Let us know what you need. Let us know what you want. And a few things happened. One, Steven Jackson's name was brought up, and they were going to look into Steven Jackson. Another thing, and the story gets kind of sketchy at this point, was a list of 10 coaches was supposed to be either presented to Dwight or Dwight was supposed to give to the front office. And at that point, it was believed that Stan Van Gundy was going to be replaced. So they were to reconvene 2 weeks later after the meeting in Michigan. Now, as told to me, after the meeting in Michigan, Dwight was really confident they were going to do the right thing. They told him they were going to help him off the court, on the court, change some ways that they marketed the team, help to make the Magic bigger, which would make Dwight bigger, and get some players in place. The 2 weeks pass, Dwight doesn't hear anything, no list of coaches, nothing happened. Draft night comes around, Dwight's getting frustrated. They call Dwight to come in for a face-to-face meeting. At that time, he didn't know what was going on, whether they were calling him in to tell him that they were making some moves, whether they were trading him. He just didn't know. So he goes into the meeting. At that point, they tell him that Steven Jackson is not available. They're not looking to trade him, and they were going to keep Stan. They had a conversation with Stan about the manner in which he communicated with the players, and Stan told them that was something that he was willing to work on, and that he was going to be speaking with someone about his negativity. So they backed off of it. And Dwight was a little upset because he felt like they had misled him and they lied to him. It got worse because after Dwight left and nothing was done, Steven Jackson was later traded that night. He went from Charlotte to Milwaukee. And Dwight left there thinking, well, you just told me that they weren't looking to move this guy. Now all of a sudden he's getting traded on the same night, so he lied to my face. Still after the draft, nothing happens, and Dwight's expecting to hear something from these guys? What are we going to do? What's our plan? Do you have any moves? Are you talking to anyone? You have to say something to me now because the lockout is coming and we're not going to be able to speak. Still, nobody gets back to him, and the lockout comes in. So now you're separated from him. You can't talk to him, and you left him with this bad taste in his mouth. Now he gets around, his inner circle, and this is all he's hearing. He doesn't have anyone from the Magic side to help him balance everything out. It's just the Magic suck, and you need to get out of here. And he's listening. He's hearing this on top of what they just did to him. And at that point, once the lockout was lifted and the season came back over, Dwight decided that he wanted out and he needed to go elsewhere. At that time, and I know that initially L.A. was the team that he wanted to go to, but something changed, and then Brooklyn became the target. Brooklyn became someplace that he was, very much infatuated with, and believed that if he went there, that the organization was going to be run differently, where he would be made to feel like a partner, and they would have an opportunity to win championships.
Now, that's a fantastic story. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of that, and it makes a lot of sense as to where we are today with this. Now, before we go to the teams and his what friends he has in the league that he would want to play with, I want to take a step back to him actually signing. Kind of next step in the story is so if he was really this distraught, and rightfully so, if everything happened as it said, then I can see why he'd be frustrated with the team. They've lied to him, that they're not really committing to what they talked about before. So at that point, what gain did Dwight Howard have in signing the option year for 1 year if this relationship has come to this point so far in the story? What benefit does he have in signing that if he ultimately wants to just move on from the organization because the organization doesn't seem committed to the same plan that they discussed?
That's a good question. I think only Dwight can answer that. As far as I know, there were some promises made to him at that point. I don't really feel comfortable making those public at this time because I would like to give the other side an opportunity to confirm. But when that time does come for me to put that information out, I'll be more than happy to come back on the show and give you guys a detailed account of what it is that I know. But I don't feel comfortable putting it out without confirming certain things. But there were promises made at the time of Dwight opting in. Those promises have since been broken. That is based on one side of a conversation, and I'm not comfortable putting it out, but let's just say that he believed he would be in Brooklyn.
Gotcha.
Before you hop in there, I just got to make a quick comedy note there. When you were talking about promises, for some reason, the Wire scene where Carver is trying to calm all the police down from yelling and screaming, that scene just popped in my head. I just thought you guys should know that.
That's funny. It's interesting because the opt-in is kind of what changed everything. I had written a piece last week and it was a piece on Dwight, and it was I certainly didn't pull punches in some of the ego-based decisions that Dwight has made here. And listen, Dwight's a great player, and in the end, that's kind of what I say is that Dwight's a great player. But one of the points that I make, and I'm interested to hear your opinion about this point, is that you've had plenty of guys force their way from one team to another, and different styles of doing it. LeBron James goes to free agency, leaves Cleveland high and dry. Carmelo Anthony, pretty much gave Denver a one-team list, found a way to get himself to New York. Chris Paul pushed his way out of New Orleans, and by the way, PR-wise, he skates because David Stern ends up being the villain and all that because of the vetoed Laker trade. So no one talks about the fact that Chris Paul tried to push his way out of New Orleans. And here you have Dwight. Now, there's been a lot of reports that Dwight was either a done deal to Brooklyn before he opted in or a done deal to Houston. I tend to believe he was a done deal to Brooklyn before he opted in. But if Dwight doesn't opt back in here, from a PR standpoint, no one's going to look at him in the end any worse than they've looked at LeBron, Carmelo Anthony, or Chris Paul. Dwight just gets grouped there. Not the worst place in the world in NBA circles to be grouped. I think when you look at the PR hit and where people start to perceive Dwight to this extreme negativity that he's come to now, to me has to do with the opt-in. Would you agree or disagree with that statement, Jarrod?
I would agree, but the opt-in was kind of the cherry on the sundae because there was some back and forth. Remember, before my interview with Dwight, he had just told the local Orlando news paper, and whoever was in San Antonio, that he was out of there. Like, he wasn't staying. They know what he wants. They need to roll the dice and all this other stuff. And then, I catch him, and he's singing a different tune. So that's the perception of the public. The perception of the public is that he's a waffler. The perception in New York is that he opted out because he was scared to play in New York. And it's just not – it's not entirely true. Do I think it was some trepidation? Sure. I mean, this was big, and he certainly was aware of how he would be viewed in Orlando. I think what Dwight missed is it didn't make a difference whether he went back and forth or not. When he left Orlando, he was going to be seen as a villain. And the same thing with LeBron. Let me so I want to touch on something before I move forward. So, like, there's this culture of making these guys out to be villains because they choose to go and accept a better job, right? LeBron's a villain in Cleveland because he took a better job in Miami. But the Cleveland front office isn't a villain because they didn't want to trade J.J. Hickson to get Amari Stoudemire. Like, people forget about that. If you trade and you get Amari there, there's a good chance LeBron's still in Cleveland, right? Players get traded every day without notice. Players get cut every day without notice. Players get ripped off from their contracts every day without notice. Not so much in the NBA, but certainly every day in the NFL. But because the player is the face that you see, because the player is the one that you believe in, they're the villain when they decide, I'm going to take my future, I'm going to take my career in my own hands, and I'm going to go and do what's best. Is Carmelo wrong for forcing his way to New York, a better market for himself and his wife, and an organization that has pieces in place that theoretically would put him in a better position to win a championship than that in Denver? Not at all. We act like championship teams are built around one star when the Celtics had multiple Hall of Famers. The Bulls had Hall of Famers. The Lakers had Hall of Famers. The Spurs are going to have a few Hall of Famers. It's the way the game plays, and we got to stop vilifying athletes for taking a better job. I've done it. You've done it. I will do it again, and it's just the way of the world. You have to go to the place that's going to best put you in a position to succeed, because these players have 15 years, maybe, to make the most of their talent, the most money, the most success on court. But after they retire, the game continues. I was thinking to myself today, man, I haven't heard anyone say anything about Barry Bonds in months. I haven't heard anyone say anything about Ken Griffey in months. But people are still going to Seattle Mariners games. People are still going to see the Giants play. They have a World Series since Barry Bonds. Now, what if Barry Bonds says, you know what, not getting it done in San Francisco, maybe I should go play for the Yankees and give myself an opportunity to win a championship? Would he have been wrong in getting the one thing he doesn't have in his career? Would Ken Griffey Jr. have been wrong if he signed with the Red Sox or the Yankees to put himself in a better position to win a championship? No, they stay loyal to their particular teams. Those teams don't build around them. And these Hall of Fame players, possibly the greatest of all time, leave without that one thing that you can't buy, a championship. And I'm not going to fault any player for putting themselves in a position to get that prize, because that's what this is all about. They have all the money they'll ever be able to spend. They have all the accolades they'll ever be able to hear. And regardless of how successful they are, they're still going to have their haters. LeBron won the championship, and people are still hating on this guy. But you can't buy a championship, and I'm not going to fault guys. And we, as a media, need to stop faulting guys for making the best decision for themselves and their family, unless we're going to hold front offices as accountable as we do players, because front office guys will make trades every day to put themselves in a better position to win a championship, and they're applauded, but players are just vilified for doing the same thing, and I don't appreciate that. But I digress. In terms of Dwight, and I forgot where we left off, the fact of the matter is Brooklyn looked appealing to him at the time, and the perception was that Dwight was afraid to go to Brooklyn, that's why he opted out, or Dwight was waffling, or there was a guarantee that Stan Van Gundy was going to get fired, and that was a part of the deal, or he was going to decide the fate of Otis and Stan. Now, people not knowing that, again, Dwight was told in the summer, or he was led to believe in the summer, that Stan was going to get fired anyway. So there's a perception of Dwight that's been allowed to manifest itself into this image that goes against everything that people believe, this Superman image that has been built up over the years to be just a lie. And I think the Magic have done themselves and Dwight a disservice by allowing that to go unchecked, especially if your long-term goal is to keep this guy and talk him in the stand. Like, why talk him in the stand after you've allowed everyone to kill him? It just doesn't make any sense to me, and it's a tough situation. But again, I think it all spawns from Dwight doing what is best for him, or at least what he felt was best for him at that particular time.
I got to say, that might have been the greatest rant I've ever heard on our podcast, Jarrod. That was fantastic. And, I can't agree with you anymore. And there's one more note I want to point out to that is, look at the Steve Nash trade that recently just happened. I did not hear one bad word about that. People understood that Nash is on his last leg, so to speak. He's going to get that title. So I guess, the fans and the media are just hypocrites. They just want athletes to suffer until, the window is basically closed for them to go get a title. And then even then, as you point out, with your baseball scenarios there, that, even that would put a sour taste in certain fans' mouths. And, there are some feel-good stories like that, in certain sports where a player will go latch on, get a title, and, call it a day. And we like that. But then when the star is, being realistic, and you said it best on your last line there, Dwight needs to do what's best for him, because no organization is going to do what's best for him. Yeah, they'll give him a lot of money. They'll give him as much as they can, but, they do that because of the return of investment that player gives to the organization. Not doing it because they like Dwight. They're doing it because it's a business all the way around. So I love the rant. It was absolutely fantastic. But I kind of want to shift gears into what we were talking about.
Let me wait. Jacob, I have one more point before you shift gears on that, because I think what's interesting about what Jarrod just said is that if you look at the best example of that is what's just happened over the course of the last 10 months with the New York Knicks, where the New York Knicks turned around and amnestied Chauncey Billups as a quote-unquote business move to bring in Tyson Chandler. Yet 10 months later, they're willing to vilify Jeremy Lin for signing a deal that got him the most money in his pocket and renegotiating that deal with the team he signed it with, which was nowhere close to being unethical as much as they want to paint it as that. Okay, to be able to put him in a position where he can make more money and better himself and better his career. Well, when they were dumping Billups, that was business. When Jeremy Lin was doing something to better himself, that somehow ended up being not business, personal and unethical and wrong. And the Knicks got exposed to me as hypocrites there.
No question. I mean, and Chauncey Billups was the piece that you needed. It's a shady business, and I think that, with the players, they're front and center. You see how much money they got. You see how much fame they have. And you see how much admiration they have from the fans. And I think that a lot of this is fueled just from just a pure jealousy of these guys. And, it makes me sick to my stomach. And I admire them for being able to play through it, because it's very difficult to be welcoming to a fan that has such nasty things to say about you. And it's a tough situation for him. And look, I'm not going to cry for a guy that has $150 million in the bank. But I do understand that, it's more to it than what the fans see. And, my problem is that the fans, they like to consider themselves to be, on par with certain sports writers or sophisticated. Well, if that's the truth, then you have to look further into the story to try to get an understanding from it. And that's all I've ever asked. If you have an understanding of the entire story and you choose to take the approach of being anti-player, I respect that, even if I don't agree with your opinion, but at least look into it further.
So we're going to shift the gears here, because we're talking about, what Dwight wants, and that's the title. And to me, this is where the story gets a little crazy on Dwight's side, because I don't get how 1 minute the Lakers can be, a destination for you. Because if the ultimate goal is to win a title, and that seems to be the common thread with all these stars that are, demanding to be moved places, or, signing elsewhere, or getting traded elsewhere, is they want to win a title. And none of us are going to downfall them for that. But my question is the teams that Dwight is listing, and having such a small list of teams really hurts his chance to actually get out there. Now, I understand he doesn't want to, sign with a subpar playoff team long term and then kind of be stuck in the same situation he was at. He wants that elite team, which I completely understand. But how could he write off the Lakers when, they're consistently shown for many years that they, are at the peak and they have an ability to win a title every single year? Doesn't he want to be a part of something like that? I understand the Nets, such as their new core, that could be an option, but now he's going to have to go play in Orlando for half a season if he wants that Brooklyn dream. And we all know how awkward that's going to be for those first few months of the season when, it's open that he doesn't want to play there. The front office is trying to move him, but they can't get a package that works for them. They're not just going to give him away. So this is where the stickiness actually comes about. Talk to us a little bit about the teams that you know that Dwight would approve on, which teams that maybe he's not thinking of that you think would be a good fit for him?
Okay, well, and I've expressed it to Dwight, and, I know I'll probably get killed for this, but I think you should consider the Knicks. I think the Knicks have the players in place. Tyson Chandler certainly would be involved in that deal. And I know people believe that the Magic wouldn't go for Amar'e Stoudemire, but I think it's something that they would have to consider. He's a hometown boy. I think he's still an all-star. I think Amar'e's going to have a great year. I think he's a hell of a player. It's something that you would have to consider because I think Amar'e's best as a first option on the team. More importantly, I think Amar'e will welcome Orlando. And, you always want to have someone, particularly a star, that wants to be there. And, also think that adding the Knicks to the list really opens things up because people know that the Knicks have pieces in place that, can make that deal happen. So you would get L.A. to sweeten their pie. You would get Houston to sweeten their pie. I mean, it works for Orlando. In terms of Brooklyn, you have to look at it a little bit differently. L.A. is L.A., and they're always going to be L.A. But there's a few things that are working against L.A., and one, and it's glaring, is that there are a lack of perimeter players that will be free around the time that Kobe and Steve Nash are leaving. And you have to have a team in place. It's one thing to say, okay, well, we're going to go out there and we're going to try to get a Rudy Gay. Is Rudy Gay good enough to beat Miami even at that point? Because you have to believe that Miami's going to, add a piece or two as Wade gets older. Will they be good enough to beat a more mature and a seasoned Oklahoma City team? You have to think long term. Now, if the guy I want to play with is Darren, and if Darren and I are around the same age and we can grow at the same pace and we can grow together and have 4 or 5 cracks at this thing, I have to believe that I'm going to get at least 1, maybe 2, and I like my chances. With L.A., you're looking at a situation where guys are at the end of their careers. And furthermore, there's always a question about playing with Kobe Bryant, what your role is going to be. And Dwight would be foolish to leave Orlando and everything he has here because he is the man in Orlando. That Amway Center, that's Dwight's house. Like, this is Dwight's city. That's Dwight's team. He'd be foolish to leave someplace like Orlando to go to L.A. to be Kobe's designated rebounder. So you want to make sure that you're going to be used where you can be most effective but still be Dwight Howard. That doesn't necessarily mean coming in and taking Kobe's team from him because I think as long as Kobe is on the Lakers, it's going to be his team. But you want to make sure Kobe is open and willing to usher in a new era. And that new era would be, okay, I'm going to do now what was done when it was time for Shaq to move on and he was traded out and the keys were handed over to Kobe. I'm going to prepare Dwight for that, and I would think that would be something that Kobe would be willing to do, being that Shaq didn't necessarily do that for him. But that's not. Kobe said said himself, as long as he's in the league, he's going to be the man. He's not going to take a role when he scores 20 points a game. He'd leave. You can't, just voluntarily give up, a mansion to go sleep on the sofa in somebody's house. And that's what Dwight will be doing if it's not established what his role is going to be. The Brooklyn thing is so many different opportunities there. Playing with Darren a long period of time and having multiple cracks at a championship. The combination of a dominant point guard and the best big men in the league, which would give Miami trouble, and which has always been the combination that works perfectly. Dwight has never had a perimeter player of Darren's standard to play with. It would make him a hell of a lot better, and it would make Darren a lot better, and everyone else around him. They would be championship contenders immediately. But more importantly is this. Leaving Orlando in the new building and building a culture can be replaced in Brooklyn because 20 years from now, Dwight can look back on the Barclays Center and say, you know what, that was my house. I brought Brooklyn in. I brought the Nets into Brooklyn the right way. I made them relevant. I made them a contender. They were talked about, and people were excited about Brooklyn coming as a team. But when I got here, it took a whole different level. We went head-to-head with the Knicks for popularity in New York City, and no one has ever been able to do that. He can't do that in L.A. He can't do that in Orlando. But if Dwight wins a championship in Brooklyn, he's a god.
That's fact. That's a fact, and it's and it's in terms of what Brooklyn can provide the opportunities. It's clear. I mean, right now when you look at the Nets, you put Dwight on that team in a trade that would have a Brook Lopez picks and Brooks type of package and Humphreys going out. That's a championship contender right there. That's a team that can compete with Miami to come out of the East. Here's my question with all this, and it's funny. I had a couple other things that I wanted to go to. I'm sliding this one in because it's very topical for what you just discussed. All that is, I get all that completely, and Kobe Bryant's not the most attractive guy to go play with, in terms of the fact that you put it great, you're going to go rebound for Kobe, and that's what it would be. Here's my question. With all that said, what's the matter with the Chicago Bulls? What's the matter with partnering with Derrick Rose in a similar way, who's a young guy, and you'd have an opportunity in that city to go and win multiple titles, and that would be a place. They got guys between Noah and Gibson that certainly Orlando would be interested in bringing in to start to build around. Am I wrong about that? Why does Dwight not think Chicago is worthy of being a place where he can hang his hat?
I'm not sure if he doesn't think that Chicago is a place where he could be successful, but I'm pretty sure he knows that that's Derrick Rose's team and that's Derrick Rose's city. And look, guys want to be stars. I mean, you don't want to go and hang on somebody. I mean, Derrick has established a good thing going on in Chicago, but also you have to look like this. I know Derrick won the MVP. I know everyone's excited about Derrick, and I know Derrick is a fabulous ball player. But is he a better point guard than Deron Williams? Is he a better point guard than Chris Paul? Does Derrick's game necessarily mean that Dwight's going to be better? Because Derrick's a scoring point guard. He gives you 6 assists a game at best. He's not a point guard that stands at the top of the key and can take you apart passing the ball. He's a point guard that's going to attack. And that's great. But when you're someone that needs the ball, when you're someone that likes to touch the ball, when you're someone that likes the offense to run through you or you're accustomed to it, that's going to be a tough transition. And I think that you look at guys' game.
Jarrod, isn't some of that done by need, though, the fact that the Bulls, besides for Rose, are so offensively challenged?
No. I think that point guards are point guards, and I think that Derrick could take 2 less shots a game, and I think that he could get 2 to 3 more assists a game. I just think that, his game isn't tailored for that. I think he's an attack point guard. He is not a point guard that I see standing at the top of the key and cutting you up. That's just not his game. And he's fabulous now. He's fabulous at what he does, but perhaps he needs to be in the offense more like a Steve Nash offense when it's up and down, where you can use his athleticism and you can get him easy assist. But Derrick's not the type of point guard that's going to stand at the top of the key and cut you up. He's not Rondo. He's not Steve Nash, who over dribbles. He's not Chris Paul, and he's not Deron Williams. And I think that as much as I like Derrick, and this is another podcast for another day, I don't understand why Derrick has been so celebrated for playing a style of basketball that Stephon Marbury was pushed out of the league for. But like I said, that's another podcast for another day. But again, and I like Derrick. I think Derrick is fabulous. I think he's a hell of a ball player. But the style, that shoot first, attack point guard, he is celebrated when other point guards have been destroyed, particularly Steph. And people say, "Oh, you didn't win all that." It's crap. Same style of play. We're talking about a style of basketball in a league where that style works. I just don't understand it. But in looking for Dwight, when you're looking for that guy that you're going to play with, you got to make sure that the styles match up right. And I think that's the biggest concern. It's not about Chicago. Chicago's a fabulous city. I think it's about the style of play. Can we play together? And then you get some people that say, look, man, Adidas don't want him out there. I'm not sure whether that's true or not. But, from a business standpoint, you don't want 2 of your biggest stars. Your 2 biggest stars in the same market. You would rather have them split up. I just think all these different things combined together just make Chicago, while attractive, probably not Dwight's best choice. Now,
I think we're all in agreement here that a trade is going to happen, whether it's, before the deadline, after deadline. I don't see this dragging out a full season and Dwight walking into free agency where his options will be signed with the team that has cap space or go back and try working with that front office of Orlando to do a sign-and trade. How do you see this playing out coming, to the trade deadline? How do you see this happening in the first few months of the season? Because it's clear to me that no deal is going to get made to where Dwight wants to go right now, and he still holds that chip over, any team that acquires his rights, that he might not sign there and he might walk into free agency. Kind of give us if you had a crystal ball, kind of give us a run through the next 6 to 12 months on how this is going to play out.
Well, the Magic, no, they can't bring Dwight. They can't bring him back. I mean, as much as they would like to, they can't bring him back. There's no point. If you're bringing Dwight Howard back, you're essentially saying we're going to take a trade with Brooklyn, the same trade that we rejected in July. And what was the sense in that? How did you improve from that? You put your fans and your team, your new coach in a position where they had to play with a guy and rely on a guy that's not going to be here long term. It just doesn't make good business sense. You're not going to convince him to stay. So I think that they traded him before the season, and I think that he's going to end up in L.A. But you don't know what the Magic want to do. I'm not convinced that they really want to trade Dwight. I'm not convinced that they ever wanted to move him. I think that they will trade him now based on his agent's foolish remarks last week and just how messy this whole situation has become, because you know that you have to. But you never know with the Magic. Rob Hennigan is playing it close to the vest. I'm not sure if that's because he's really, really smart or if he's in over his head. I know that he was put in a bad position by Alex Martins, and, he's dealing with it as best he can.
I'm going to give you competing philosophy on this because it's one of the things I'm hearing, and you can tell me if you've heard different. I mean, one of Rob Hennigan's requirements here in trading Dwight is to be able to attach some bad contracts to him. This is pretty much, you look at where Orlando's salary structure is now, and the contract to Glenn Davis is not a good one. The contract to Jason Richardson isn't a great one. Turkoglu's contract's bad. Duhon's contract's not good. He's got bad contracts he wants out. His last opportunity here to get rid of some bad contracts is attaching them to Dwight. Now, to my knowledge, Houston's been somewhat resistant in taking too many of those, and certainly they're a little limited in how much of those they can take now that both the Lynn and the Sheik offer sheets have not been matched, and they have them both in tow. The one thing with bringing Dwight back to start the season and putting Brooklyn back on the radar screen is Brooklyn was the one partner in all this that was willing to take as much bad salary back as possible. The part of the problem there is some of the bad salary Orlando is going to receive in that deal, and I understand Orlando's not all that enamored with Brook Lopez, but he's a tradable player even at those numbers, assuming he's healthy, because there was teams that were ready to pay him that. So you look at that in the Humphreys contract, which is big per annum but doesn't have a lot of years on him. Don't you think it would make some sense for Orlando to kind of sit down with Dwight before the season starts and say, listen, Brooklyn's our best option. We got to wait till January 15th. Can you come here, toe the line with us, put a happy face on this thing, and we'll get you out and get you where you want to go? Or is it a point where trust is so badly broken down that Dwight's not going to want to hear that and is really going to be, surly and kind of disruptive to be back in training camp with the Magic?
I don't think he'll be surly. I don't think he'll be disruptive, but I think it'll be awkward for everyone, and the energy there won't be great because it won't be about basketball. And if you're rebuilding, you need to be focusing on basketball and moving forward. So bringing him back would be incredibly foolish. Can it happen? Sure. I mean, he's at the Magic's mercy. He's at the Magic's mercy. There's really nothing he can do. If they don't move him, then he can't get moved. If they say, you know what, we're going to put him in a position where we're going to challenge him to turn down $30 million and walk away, then he has to turn down $30 million and walk away. I mean, he's at their mercy, which, I'm sure he's kicking himself about opting in. But it is what it is. He has to do what's best. And in terms of Brooklyn, they can't do as much as they would have been able to before because they have now Joe Johnson's, albatross of a contract. They have Darren. They just don't have the space that they would have before. And, I'm not sure with Orlando if they want to play Chris Humphreys, $24 million. And I know they don't want to pay Brook Lopez a max deal. So it just really seems like Brooklyn, though that would be the place that I would say he ends up going if he goes back to Orlando. It's really tough and it's difficult to understand why they would take that deal. Because if you make the deal with Brooklyn before the season goes, you have a lot of flexibility and you don't have to take on contracts. But I think Chris Humphrey's contract is a bad contract.
I agree.
You take that on, and I'm not sure if Brook Lopez is a max player. I know that if you get 7 rebounds a game, you can't get max dollars from me. So it's just a situation where it was
I've been
handled.
reading that all week.
Yeah, it's just a situation where it's been handled the wrong way, which everything points to LA or Houston, and even with Houston didn't expect the Bulls not to match, and I'm not sure what they expected to happen with Jeremy Lin. I do know that it messed up their plan to get Dwight, or it's altered what they can do, and you have to think as an organization, do we want to take on bad contracts that we're going to be stuck with to get a guy who's not going to be here? And that's really up to Daryl Morey. I think he'd be very foolish to do it.
I agree.
We'll see what's going to happen.
Now, why couldn't Dwight just say he's open to playing anywhere, go into the free agency, and have all these teams clear cap space, kind of like the summer of LeBron? I think that would have been a lot more fun for everybody, and it would have had a lot more fan bases and hope. I know a lot of Celtic fans are kind of hoping that past the big three, who could they pair up with Rajon Rondo? And you mentioned his name earlier. I agree with you. I think his style of play would match up really well with Dwight. Be a very, very deadly pick and roll that I don't think many people would stop. But I don't got any more Dwight questions for him. Do you?
I have 2 more. I have 2 more that I think are pretty relevant here, and it'll be pretty quick. First of all, Jarrod, how's Dwight's back?
He is working to get better. He's going through his rehab. Look, this situation, it scared the hell out of him because Dwight has had a charmed existence in terms of injuries. So this really caught him off guard. So he's doing everything he needs to do. He's staying in L.A. to rehab and be right there next to the doctor that did the surgery. So he's feeling good. He's working day by day to get better. I know he does a lot of walking and he's rehabbing every day, and he's just trying to get back. So I expect him to make a full recovery, and he expects to make a full recovery.
And how's he handling all this? I mean, this is, you look at the way he's been made to be public enemy number 1, and I would think that he looks at it in a way like, I'm not doing anything that a lot of other guys don't do, and I'm in a position being one of the best players in the league and the premier big man in the league that I can, kind of choose to apply my trade wherever I want, and I'm giving them an opportunity to move me and get something for me instead of just leaving in free agency. And nonetheless, he's been made to be an absolute villain here publicly. I mean, it's become the punchline to a joke. And for a guy with his type of ability on the court, there's just a disconnect in that. And how's he handling that emotionally?
I think he's okay. I think that Dwight is a bit naive in expecting people to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a bit naive to the reality that 8 years of goodwill can be erased with with a year or 10 minutes of bad decisions. So he's dealing with it as best he can. I know he's aggravated and he feels like there were good offers on the table from Brooklyn. I know he feels like this LA thing should have happened already. But I also think that Dwight feels like they should give him away, and I don't agree with him for that. So, he's doing the best he can. He's a grown man. A lot of this is on him because he opted in. But, you got to respect the guy that does what he feels is best. Dwight has to do what's best for him. And when he opted in, he felt like it was the best option, for him at the time. And, sometimes things don't work out the way we think they should, but, he did what was best for him, and that's all you can ever do.
Jacob, anything else, bud?
No, I got one quick question for him. Does USA lose any games this Olympics run?
Only if they decide not to come and play. I don't like the way the team is put together. I remember when Colangelo came in, he was preaching about this wasn't going to be an all-star team, it was going to be a team. Well, if it's not an all-star team, where's Kendrick Perkins and Marcus Camby? Because I know we could sure use a lot more size. We have so many wings that can't do anything. And if we do lose, it's going to be because the team decides to pound the ball in the paint, and we're going to have Melo and LeBron
and Love,
power forwards and centers. Yeah, and Love. Love's got to step up though. He's playing a little soft. But I don't need Melo. I don't need LeBron, Garden, Marc Gasol. I don't need that at all.
It's funny you say that because I was watching the 2008 run the other day, and you look at that roster and you're like, Tayshaun Prince, and that kind of reminded me that so much changes in 4 years because you haven't heard that name in so long up in Detroit. But they had a team mentality with that roster. They had guys like Tayshaun Prince who would come in and do the dirty work. And I think you're absolutely right there. I didn't understand some of the acquisitions that they had. I thought they could have done better, but they
why no
put together.
Bynum on this team?
I'm sorry?
Why no Bynum on this team?
I think that had something to do with his knee. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a good question. But I think that had more to do with injury than it did with selection. But still in all, if it's not an all-star team and we need size, give Kendrick Perkins a shot. Give Marcus Camby a shot. Give guys a shot that can come in there and play and defend. We don't need Iguodala and James Harden. Like, we just don't. Somebody's not going to play. We don't need, Anthony Davis. And he ain't done nothing to earn a spot anyway. So there are guys out there that we can use. We need to make sure that we're putting the right collection of guys together. But hopefully, we win, and it's not something that we have to come back on and discuss.
You got it, Jarrod.
Thank you enough.
Yeah, thanks so much for giving us so much time today, and you shed a lot of light on a lot of things where, it's certainly, for our listeners, you kind of, open their eyes and their ears a little bit to a lot of what's going on because there's two sides to this story, but two sides aren't heard.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, thanks so much, Jarrod. We'll do it again soon, my man.
Yes, sir.
Everybody, that was Jarrod Rudolph. You can follow him on Twitter, JRudolph Sports. He is a writer for RealGM, one of the better basketball publications. It's been around since I can remember the internet days. His first website I ever, started going on when I, was a young little boy, fascinated with fantasy sports, Brian, and I'd always go there to get my news on who's hurt, who's doing this, and they do a fantastic job over at RealGM, and, we're very pleased to have him on today because, as you pointed out, Brian, he told the other side of the story, so it's now our job to make sure that this story gets out there and everyone else listens to it, and maybe they'll have a different opinion on Dwight Howard or the Orlando Magic, which I know my opinion on the front office changed a little bit.
Certainly did. I mean, he's and Jarrod hedged where he had to hedge, which is fine because he didn't want to engage in hearsay, and I respect that. I think you learned a lot about where Dwight's come from here, and some of the things that he was looking for a partnership that he hasn't had. He's pretty much been guaranteed a partnership in Brooklyn. That much is certainly obvious. He doesn't want it as much as he wants to get to Brooklyn. It sounds like he'd much rather not start the season with the Magic than get to Brooklyn. That's the point that he's come to, because if you notice, Jarrod talked down L.A. pretty much, but we know L.A.'s on his list. And the one other thing that jumped out to me that was kind of surprising was some of Jarrod's comments on Derrick Rose, which, I think they echoed some of what Dwight feels about Derrick Rose, where the shoot-first mentality and that style of play is not something Dwight wants to be associated with, which I found to be very interesting. And what you see from that, and what you get from that, is that Dwight wants to be the centerpiece of an offense. It's not enough for Dwight at this stage of his career to be the dominant defensive guy. He wants to be on a team where every possession's coming into him. And I think he believes he would be that with a Darren Williams. I don't think he believes he would be that with a Derrick Rose. I'm not sure I agree, but nonetheless, that's what his call is. That's how he feels.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because the whole theme of this is, do what's best for you, and no one else is going to do that for you. And I think, Dwight's at that stage where he understands that, and, he gave everything he could to the Magic, and it just come to a point where, it's kind of reached a plateau. And I thought Jarrod said a really good comment about it is that, they overachieved. And I think we all can agree with that. For the talent that they've had, they've always had that, subpar roster with one star. And, he did all he could.
Well, that's it. And I think the other thing, and it was early in the interview, and I want to go back to it because I think it was very important to note, as much as Dwight and Stan Van Gundy had a lot of problems, I think there's actually, getting what Jarrod said, there's a respect factor there between the two, especially Dwight for Stan, in that, and I got that through in saying that really the second star on that team was actually Stan, and there were times where Dwight looked at Stan as the first star on that team, and he was the second star. There was a ton of respect, even though Dwight wanted him out.
Yeah, and it's one of the more fascinating storylines there, and the media kind of portrayed it as such a solid relationship that neither could stand each other, and we all saw the awkward moment where Stan's talking about the situation a little bit publicly, and Dwight came over, but that's all news. It's just I think you're in agreement with me here that I just hope that both parties can move on and get past this as soon as possible.
Well, listen. I think it's funny as we were talking. I saw a report on Twitter, somebody with Orlando sources, who had said, and let me get it right, who did this? A gentleman who runs a pro basketball draft site. I'm not exactly sure his name. I'm going to find it for you right now, so I can properly credit. Actually, his name's not even on his Twitter profile, but he runs ProBasketballDraft.com. I said, as of right now, to his sources, it looks like that the Magic are going to keep Dwight in the short term. I really think, and I didn't agree with Jarrod here, I really think Brooklyn's going to be the place, because as much as they don't like Brook Lopez, he's movable. There's teams that were lining up for him. As much as they don't like Humphries, and maybe Humphries isn't movable, but that contract is done at the end of 2 years, and ultimately he may be more movable than Hedo Turkoglu, whoever is, so the Humphries deal matches up with Turkoglu for them. So that certainly is a help. I think the more rhetoric you get out of Orlando and the longer they hold Dwight, the more likely Brooklyn is here, because they're going to want to shed bad contracts, and they're going to want to get rid of some of these guys that were involved in this negative culture and make it a lot more positive.
I don't think I could have said it better than that, Brian. But anything else to add before we hop off here until we join?
No, we're good, bud.
That was a fantastic show. I'll get editing tonight. We'll post it for everybody to listen to tonight, and we'll tweet the hell out of it, and hopefully everyone can see this side of the story, because it's really remarkable. Jarrod gave us phenomenal stuff today, and I don't think there's a better source out there right now that could kind of put everything in perspective as he did today.
It was great. It worked out real well, and I thank you, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would do it up for here for NBA Unplugged. That was Brian Geltzeiler from HoopCritic.com. I'm Jake Unmobile from ProBasketballTalk.com. We got to thank Jarrod one more time for joining us from RealGM, and we'll catch you guys next week.